The image that always comes to mind when I think of apartheid South Africa is noise. It's a history of a volume. You hear the shouting of protests, the barking of police dogs, the chanting of crowds, the crack of gunfire. It's a chaotic, deafening sonic landscape.
Mm-hmm.
But today, we are looking at a figure who operated in the quiet. Someone whose power didn't come from shouting into a megaphone, but from sitting in a room alone staring at a blank page.
And yet that silence was arguably louder than the gunfire. We are talking, of course, about Nadine Gordimer.
The first South African and the first African woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. That happened in 1991. But to treat her just as a writer feels like a category error. It feels too small.
It does.
Based on the biography and the stack of literary analysis we've gone through for this deep dive, she seems more like a spy, or maybe a witness of the prosecution in the trial of her own country.
That is a very, very accurate framing. The sources we have today, including a comprehensive biography and several critical essays, paint a picture of a woman who was effectively living a double life.
Right.
On the surface, she is this petite, bourgeois white woman living in the suburbs of Johannesburg. She's attending dinner parties, she's, wearing elegant clothes. But beneath that veneer, she is editing Nelson Mandela's defense speeches and hiding fugitives in her guest room.
It's the intersection of high art and high treason. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to understand the mechanics of that life. How does a girl born in a dusty mining town with a so-called weak heart and a repressive mother become the moral conscience of a nation?
Yeah, how does that happen?
How do you go from a colonial backwater to the Nobel Prize?
It's a remarkable trajectory. And to understand it, we have to look at the key themes that emerge from her life and from her work. We're going to look at the intersection of art and politics. Can you ever really separate them?
I don't think she thought you could.
No. We're also going to talk about the concept of the white witness, what it means to document a struggle that is in many ways not your own. It's a very complicated position to be in.
And censorship. We have to talk about censorship, the power of the written word and why the government was so terrified of her books.
Absolutely. And finally, the tension of identity. Gordimer was Jewish, she was white, she was African, she was English-speaking, she was a Venn diagram of conflicting identities, and she lived right in the messy middle of it all.
So let's start at the beginning. You have to understand the geography to understand the woman. She wasn't born in the cosmopolitan circles of Cape Town or, the political heat of Soweto. She was born in 1923 in a place called Springs.
Springs. The name sounds so pastoral, doesn't it? Like a spa town or something out of a Jane Austen novel.
It really does. I picture green hills and, Springs.
But the reality described in the notes is anything but. Springs was a mining town on the East Rand, just outside Johannesburg. In the 1920s and 30s, this was a place defined entirely by extraction, by what was under the ground.
Gold.
Gold. So you have these massive gold mines, these huge white slag heaps that look like snow from a distance, but were actually toxic waste. The whole landscape was industrial, scarred.
And the social structure was just as rigid, just as mechanical.
Perfectly. It was a colonial machine designed to pull wealth out of the ground. And the social structure, the racial hierarchy, reflected that perfectly. There were the white mine managers, the white shop owners, and then at the bottom, the massive population of black laborers living in townships.
And inside this machine, you have the Gordimer household. And looking at the profile of her parents, this seems to be a study in contradictions from the very beginning.
A huge study in contradictions. We talk about her identity as a white African, but her roots are actually quite complicated. She is a product of immigration.
Which puts her slightly outside the main power structures, right? She's not Afrikaner. She's not really part of the British colonial establishment.
Exactly. She's in that other category. Her father, Isidore Gordimer, was a Jewish watchmaker. And he wasn't just an immigrant, he was a refugee.
A refugee from where?
He had fled Tsarist Russia, specifically from a town called Igorai in what is now Lithuania, I believe. It was part of the Russian Empire then. And he fled young. He left at the age of 13 to escape the pogroms and the rampant anti-Semitism.
13? That's a child.
A child on his own. It's an incredible story of survival.
And this is one of those psychological puzzles I found most fascinating in the reading. You have a man who fled state-sanctioned persecution. He knows what it's like to be the underdog. He knows what it's like to be hated for your ethnicity. You would think, logically, that he would look at the racial oppression in South Africa and see a mirror of his own trauma. You'd think he'd be the first one to say, this is wrong, I've seen this before.
You would think so.
Yeah.
It seems like the natural empathetic bridge to make. But the biography highlights a stark, somewhat tragic irony here. Isidore Gordimer had almost no sympathy for the plight of black South Africans.
None at all.
The sources describe him as being completely apolitical, even conservative. He wasn't an activist, he was a survivor. His focus was entirely on assimilation, on safety, on his trade as a watchmaker. His goal was to not make waves.
It's almost as if the trauma made him close ranks rather than open up, build a wall around himself and his family.
Precisely. It's a common, if uncomfortable, psychological phenomenon. The oppressed becoming indifferent to other oppressions in their quest for security. He wanted to be a good South African, which in that context meant adhering to the racial hierarchy. He built a little fortress around his family.
So the father keeps his head down, but the mother, Hannah, everyone called her Nan, she is the complete opposite energy in the house.
Completely different. Nan Myers was British, also Jewish, but from a comfortable, assimilated background in London. And she was the one looking out the window of that fortress Isidore had built.
And what did she see?
She saw the poverty. She saw the systemic cruelty of the past laws and the segregation. And unlike her husband, she felt compelled to do something. She actually founded a creche, a daycare for black children in their area.
So she was an activist in her own right.
In a limited, charitable, sort of bourgeois way, yes. It wasn't radical political action, but it was engagement. It was a recognition of the humanity of the people her husband was trying to ignore.
So inside young Nadine's living room, you have a dialectic playing out every single day. Indifference versus action, survival versus compassion, keep your head down versus reach your hand out.
And watching all of this is Nadine. But she's not just watching because she's naturally curious. She's watching because she's trapped. And we have to talk about the weak heart. This part of her story feels like something out of a Tennessee Williams play or a Victorian novel.
It does have a gothic quality to it. It's so strange. I mean, what actually happened?
When Nadine was a child, she was attending a Catholic convent school. But then when she was around 10 or 11, her mother abruptly pulled her out.
Just like that.
Just like that. Nan claimed Nadine had a weak heart. Specifically, a thyroid condition that made physical exertion dangerous. She basically said, you are too sick to go to school, you are too sick to run and play with other children, you must stay home.
But was it true? Or was this, I don't know, Munchausen by proxy? Was the mother projecting her own anxieties?
The sources lean very heavily toward the latter, or at least a severe exaggeration. Nan had her own anxieties, she was in a very unhappy marriage to Isidore, and it seems she projected that need for control onto Nadine. She effectively placed her daughter under house arrest for the most crucial years of her adolescence.
So from age 11 to 16, roughly.
Yes, she was cut off from her peers, cut off from the world.
That is a lifetime for a teenager. Those are the formative social years. No dances, no sports, no passing notes in class, just home.
Just home. And her mother. But think about the unintended consequence of that, well, that totalitarian maternal control. What does a brilliant, lonely child do when she is locked in a house in a dusty mining town?
She reads, she devours books, she lives in other worlds.
She reads everything in the local library. And more importantly, she dissects the people around her. That isolation was the crucible. It forced her to develop a capacity for observation that was almost forensic.
She couldn't be a participant, so she became a spectator.
A professional spectator. She wasn't lonely, she was watching it. She was looking at the adults at her parents' dinner parties, looking at the servants, looking at the dynamics of power in her own kitchen. She was studying the human animal in its cage.
So the mother, in trying to keep her weak and dependent and close, actually sharpened her mind into a weapon.
Exactly. The weak heart didn't kill her, it made her a writer. And a fiercely independent one, eventually. She published her first story, The Quest for Seeing Gold, at age 13 in the Children's Sunday Express.
13.
By 16, she was publishing adult fiction in national magazines. She basically skipped childhood and went straight to being an observer of the human condition.
And there's another layer to this early exposure to repression. It wasn't just her mother repressing her. She saw the state doing it too, in a very direct way. There's a mention of a police raid on her home.
Yes, this is a pivotal memory she talks about. As a teenager, she witnessed a police raid on her family home. But again, the police weren't there for the white family. They weren't there for Isidore or Nan.
They were there for the servants.
They were raiding the servants' quarters in the backyard. Under the pass laws and liquor laws, they could basically invade those spaces at will. They were looking for illicitly brewed alcohol or seditious documents, and they confiscated letters and diaries from a servant's room.
That must have been a violation that stuck with her. The idea that your private words, your thoughts on a page, could be seized by the state.
It was a profound early lesson in the total reach of the apartheid state. It showed her that privacy was a privilege of whiteness, and even that was fragile. It's not a huge leap from seizing a servant's diary to banning a novelist's book.
So, she's the girl in the bubble, but the bubble is made of colonial anxiety and maternal control. Eventually, though, the bubble has to pop. For Gordimer, that pop seems to be university.
Yes, she spends a year at the University of the Witwatersrand, or WITS, as it's known in South Africa. And for a white girl from Springs, who has been homeschooled and isolated for years, this was like stepping onto another planet.
Because Springs was a white silo, the interactions with black people were purely on a master-servant basis.
Completely. But at WITS, for the very first time, the color bar wasn't just a law. It was something people were actively intellectually challenging and crossing. She met black intellectuals, artists, writers, lawyers, people on her own level.
And she drifted into the orbit of Sophiatown.
She did. Sophiatown is legendary. We should probably explain what that was for listeners who might not know. It was sort of the Harlem Renaissance of South Africa, right?
Exactly. Before the nationalist government bulldozed it in the 1950s, specifically to crush black urban culture, Sophiatown was this vibrant, jazz-soaked, intellectually rigorous Johannesburg suburb.
It was a place where black and white bohemians mixed. You had writers like Isikia Mfalele, artists, musicians. For Gordimer, this dismantled the lie she had been raised with. The lie that black people were inherently inferior or different. She was in rooms with people who were smarter, funnier, and more talented than anyone she knew from Springs.
She realized that the barriers she saw every day were political constructs, not natural laws. This is the awakening phase of the hero's journey.
And it coincides with her professional ascent. It's actually surprising how early she broke into the American market. In 1951, The New Yorker accepted her story, A Watcher of the Dead.
That cannot be overstated. In 1951, for a young writer in Johannesburg to get into The New Yorker, that is a golden ticket. It's like being an indie band and getting a call from the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, it changed everything. It gave her financial independence, which is crucial for a female writer in the 50s. But maybe more importantly, it gave her a kind of international immunity.
A shield.
A shield. When you are a New Yorker contributor, when you are famous in London and New York, the South African police have to think twice before dragging you away in the middle of the night. It gave her a platform from which she could be the white witness.
She had a very specific philosophy about short stories, didn't she? The sources say she called the short story the literary form for our age. Why do you think she felt that way?
Well, think about the nature of life under apartheid. It was fragmented, it was tense, people were living in moments of collision, not long, flowing narratives.
So a novel implies a certain stability of society that just didn't exist.
I think so. A novel implies a long, coherent history, but a short story. That captures the flash of lightning. It captures the specific fleeting interaction between a white mistress and a black servant in a kitchen, or a moment of police violence on a street corner. She felt it was the most honest way to document a fractured society.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like a snapshot of a car crash rather than a long history of the road. But she did write novels, of course. Her first one, The Lying Days, came out in 1953.
The Lying Days. A very telling title, isn't it? This book really acts as a bridge between her early life and her mature political work. It's a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story set in a mining town suspiciously like Springs.
So it's semi-autobiographical.
Deeply. The protagonist, Helen, wakes up to the reality of racism around her. It's essentially Gordimer documenting her own shedding of innocence. She realizes that her comfortable white life, her lying days of childhood, are built on a foundation of lies and exploitation.
But realizing it is one thing. Doing something about it is another. Usually in these repressive regimes, intellectuals have, three choices. You leave, you go into exile, you shut up internal exile, or you get involved and go to jail.
But Gordimer found a fourth way.
The Activist in the Shadows. This is where the biography reads less like a literary review and more like a spy thriller. Because I think people today might assume she was just a writer-activist, signing petitions, writing stern letters to the editor.
Right, the champagne socialist idea, attending fundraisers in fancy clothes.
Exactly. But she was in the trenches. The big shift seems to happen around 1960. Two things happen. First, the arrest of her best friend, Betty Dutoit, who was a trade unionist.
And that made it personal. It wasn't an abstract injustice anymore. It was her friend being taken away.
And then the Sharpeville massacre.
Sharpeville, March 21st, 1960. That was the turning point for the whole country. Police opening fire on peaceful protesters who were burning their passbooks. 69 people killed. Most of them shot in the back as they tried to flee.
It was the moment the gloves came off. The state showed its true face.
And that spurred Gordimer into direct action. She joined the African National Congress, the ANC.
And we absolutely need to remind the listener, at this time, the ANC was not the ruling party. It was a banned organization. The government had declared it a terrorist group.
It was illegal. Being a member was a criminal act. She was risking years in prison, possibly worse. This wasn't like joining a political party today. This was joining the resistance.
And she wasn't just a card-carrying member, was she? She was using her house, her middle-class white suburban house, as a safe house.
Yes. This is incredible. She hid ANC leaders who were on the run in her own home to help them escape arrest. Can you imagine the tension? The police had already raided her home once as a child for a servant's letters. Now she is hiding fugitives of the state in her guest room.
While her neighbors are what? Having barbecues and complaining about their gardeners.
The sheer nerve of it. She was also driving people to the border, to Swaziland or Botswana, to get them out of the country. She was effectively trafficking revolutionaries under the nose of one of the most efficient police states in the world.
And she wasn't blindly loyal either. The sources say she joined in part to address the organization's flaws from the inside.
That is so characteristic of her intellectual rigor. She didn't do blind faith. She supported the goal freedom, a non-racial democracy. But she wasn't afraid to critique the methods or the internal politics of the ANC. She was a critical supporter, not a follower.
But the most stunning connection, the one that really cements her place in history, is her relationship with Nelson Mandela. This just blew my mind. I knew they were friends later in life, but I didn't realize how deep and how far back the connection went.
It went all the way to the heart of the struggle. She became very close friends with his defense attorneys, particularly Bram Fisher and George Bezos. These were legendary figures in the anti-apartheid legal fight.
And through them, she gets involved in the 1964 Rivonia trial. This is the trial where Mandela and the other ANC leaders were facing the death penalty for sabotage.
They were expected to be executed. And it's during this trial that Gordimer played a clandestine role. This is the major reveal from the biography. She helped to edit Mandela's speech from the doc.
The "I am prepared to die" speech, one of the most famous, most powerful political speeches of the 20th century.
And Nadine Gordimer, the novelist, offered advice and edits on that text. She helped him shape the language to have the maximum impact, not just in the courtroom, but for the entire world.
Imagine holding that draft in your hands, knowing that if the police walk in and find it, you're done for treason, and knowing that the man who will read it might be hanged the next day. The weight of that must have been immense.
It speaks to the incredible trust Mandela and his team placed in her. Her literary skill was seen as a weapon in the struggle.
And that trust endured. When Mandela was finally released from prison in 1990 after 27 years, she was one of the very first people he wanted to see.
That image of them together after his release is so powerful. It's the culmination of decades of secret collaboration.
I love that. But despite all the shadow work, all this secret activism, she did step into the light eventually. The Delmas treason trial in 1986.
Yes, this was late in the apartheid era. The regime was starting to crumble but was lashing out violently. She testified on behalf of 22 anti-apartheid activists. She went to court, got on the stand, and publicly aligned herself with them.
What'd she say?
She basically gave a lecture on the morality of resistance literature and why these activists, who were accused of treason, were acting out of conscience. She used her status as a literary icon to defend them. She later called it the proudest day of her life.
Prouder than winning the Nobel Prize.
It seems so, because that was action. That was putting her body and her reputation on the line for justice in a very direct way. The Nobel is an award for past work. This was about saving people's lives in the present. It wasn't about literature. It was about solidarity.
But her primary weapon was still the typewriter, and the government knew it. This leads us to the war on words, because the South African government didn't just arrest people, they arrested books.
Oh, the censorship was a massive bureaucratic apparatus in apartheid South Africa. It was a whole government department dedicated to silence. And Gordimer was a frequent target. They saw her as incredibly dangerous.
Let's look at the list from our notes. The late bourgeois world banned for a decade. A World of Strangers ban for 12 years.
And Berger's Daughter, published in June 1979, was banned just 1 month later. They moved fast on that one.
But then something very strange happened with Berger's Daughter, right? The censorship board changed its mind.
This is a fascinating glimpse into the twisted, cynical logic of the late apartheid regime. 3 months after banning it, The publication's appeal board unbanned Berger's daughter.
Why? Did they suddenly develop a taste for literary fiction?
No. Their reasoning is one of the most twisted insults in literary history. They claimed the book was, and I'm quoting the sentiment here, too one-sided to be subversive.
Too one-sided to be subversive? What does that even mean? It sounds like nonsense.
It was a very cynical, tactical pivot. They were essentially saying, this book is so biased against us, so filled with leftist propaganda, that no thinking person would take it seriously. It's not a real threat, therefore we can afford to allow it. They tried to frame their censorship reversal as a literary critique.
They were gaslighting her. They were trying to dismiss her work as unserious polemic.
Precisely. It's not dangerous, it's just shrill.
Wow. How did Gordimer react to that? I imagine I'd be furious. It's more insulting than just banning it.
She saw right through it. In her book of essays, Essential Gesture, she called them out. She noted that they unbanned her, a white writer with a huge international reputation, while at the exact same time, they were still banning books by black authors left and right.
So it was a PR move.
It was pure public relations. They were trying to use her to show the world how liberal and tolerant they were becoming. She refused to be used as a token of the regime's fake tolerance.
That is integrity. But here's where the story gets really complicated and I think very painful. Fast forward to 2001. Apartheid is over. The ANC is in power. The revolution she fought for has been won. And suddenly, Nadine Gordimer is being accused of racism.
Yes, this is a deeply painful episode for her. The Gauteng Provincial Education Department temporarily removed her novel, July's People, from the school curriculum. They called it deeply racist, superior, and patronizing.
The very people she fought for, the new democratic government, were now censoring her.
Yes, and Gordimer took this as a grave, grave insult. But it highlights the complexity of her position. For decades, she was a white woman writing about black lives under apartheid, and she was celebrated for it. But in a post-apartheid world, that voice, that perspective, began to be scrutinized in a completely different way.
It's the white witness dilemma again. Can you ever truly step outside your own privilege to tell someone else's story? And who gets to decide?
And that is exactly the question her books grapple with. So shall we dive into the books themselves? Because to understand the controversies, you have to understand the stories. Her books are not simple morality plays. They are messy, ambiguous, and deeply unsettling.
Let's do it. We've got 5 key works to cover. First up, the one that won the Booker Prize in 1974, The Conservationist.
This is a dense, poetic, difficult novel. It follows a character named Mering, a wealthy white industrialist. And he's very much an antihero. He buys a farm outside the city, not to farm it, but to conserve nature.
Conserve. I feel like that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It is. It's the central metaphor. He wants to keep things as they are. He wants to preserve his piece of pristine African landscape. Just like he wants to keep apartheid South Africa as it is, he wants to conserve his white paradise. But there's a problem on his farm.
A body.
An unidentified black corpse is found on the land. A man who is likely a migrant worker, nobody knows. Mering does the decent thing. He arranges for the police to take it away, gets a pauper's burial. He tries to smooth it over. But the dead body haunts the work, as critics say. It refuses to stay buried, metaphorically.
That is such a powerful symbol, the black body that white privilege is built on top of. You can try to bury it, you can try to look at the pretty landscape and the wildlife, but the body is always there, under the soil.
Exactly. It undermines his sense of ownership. It says, this land is not yours. It belongs to the people who have died here, the people who are buried in it.
Yeah.
It challenges the very concept of white ownership in Africa. It's a brilliant, haunting book.
Okay, next one. Berger's Daughter. This is the one that got banned and then unbanned, published in 1979.
Yes. The story follows Rosa Berger, and she is the daughter of a famous white anti-apartheid martyr, Lionel Berger, who died in prison.
Which sounds a lot like the family of Bram Fisher, the lawyer we mentioned earlier, who defended Mandela.
It was widely seen as a coded homage to Bram Fisher and his daughter. The novel explores the immense burden of that legacy. Rosa is trying to figure out who she is, separate from her father's heroic martyrdom.
It's asking the question, do I have to be a revolutionary just because my parents were?
And can I have a private life when the public struggle is so demanding? Am I allowed to just be a person? It was written right after the Soweto uprising of 1976, so the tension in the book is palpable. It captures that feeling of being swept up by history, whether you want to be or not.
Then we have July's People from 1981. This is the one that got called racist later on, so what's the plot here?
This one is a speculative novel. It imagines a future which was a terrifyingly real possibility at the time of a full-blown civil war, a bloody revolution where whites are being hunted in the cities.
Okay, so it's dystopian.
It's dystopian, but it felt like prophecy to many readers in 1981. The story follows a liberal white couple, the Smales, as they are forced to flee the city, and they go to hide in the rural village of their former servant, July.
So it's a total role reversal. The master becomes the dependent, the servant holds all the power, all the knowledge of how to survive.
Exactly. They are living in July's mother's hut, completely dependent on him for food, for safety, for information, and the novel just strips away the veneer of their white liberalism. It exposes the deep, unspoken dependency that actually existed under apartheid. Whites were always dependent on black labor, but they pretended they weren't. In this book, the pretense is gone.
So why the accusation of racism in 2001?
Well, from a post-apartheid perspective, some critics felt that the way July and the other black characters were depicted still centered the white gaze. That July was seen as this inscrutable, mysterious figure, and that the story never truly enters his consciousness. The argument was that it was still a story about whiteness in crisis.
I see. It's a book about terrible choices forced by hate. It sounds deeply uncomfortable.
It is meant to be uncomfortable. She wasn't writing a roadmap for racial harmony. She was holding up a mirror to the fear and the prejudice that lurked even within the most well-meaning white liberals.
Moving to the post-apartheid era. The House Gun from 1998.
This is a fascinating shift. Apartheid is gone, but the dream of a peaceful rainbow nation hasn't quite arrived. The story is about an educated liberal couple, an architect, and a doctor whose son murders his housemate.
So it's about crime.
It's about crime, but it's also about the legacy of violence. It deals with the rising crime rates in the New South Africa and the ubiquity of guns in people's homes for protection, the house gun of the title.
It's interesting that she didn't just stop writing or write celebratory novels when the ANC won. A lot of struggle writers ran out of steam when the struggle ended.
But she turned her unflinching eye to the new problems. She was a realist. She understood that the violence of the past doesn't just evaporate, it morphs. It moves from political violence to criminal violence, but the roots are the same.
And finally, the pickup from 2001. This one feels more global in its scope.
It is. It's a romance of a sort, between a wealthy white South African woman, Julie, and an illegal Arab immigrant, Abdu. He's a car mechanic, he's undocumented.
Another story about crossing boundaries.
Always. And another reversal. When Abdu is inevitably caught and deported, Julie decides to go with him to his unnamed homeland, presumably a poor, religiously conservative North African or Middle Eastern country. And suddenly, she is the alien. She is the one who doesn't speak the language, doesn't understand the customs, has no status.
She becomes the immigrant.
Yes, it explores displacement, globalism, and again, the profound difficulty of truly understanding the other, even when you love them.
It seems like she was obsessed with that idea, what it means to be an outsider, even in your own life. Which brings us back to her own identity. We mentioned her parents were Jewish, but we haven't really dug into how that shaped her because the critics have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, let's talk about what the sources call her repressed identity. Many critics noted that her Jewishness was often absent or repressed in her work. She didn't write Jewish novels in the way, say, Philip Roth in America or Saul Bellow did. It wasn't the central theme.
Was she trying to hide it? Or was she just not interested in it?
It's complex. Not hide it, perhaps, but she certainly didn't center it.
Mm-hmm.
Gordimer identified as an atheist. However, in interviews, she admitted to having a religious temperament.
That's a great phrase. Atheist with a religious temperament. What does that mean in her context?
It means she felt her moral values, her intense sense of justice, her drive to distinguish right from wrong, came directly from the Judeo-Christian ethical tradition she was raised in. She said she couldn't take the leap of faith into belief in God, but the ethical structure was deeply embedded in her.
So, did she use Jewish characters in her books?
She did, but they often functioned as mirrors or moral compasses for her white, Gentile protagonists. In The Lying Days, her first novel, there's a character named Joel Aaron. He's Jewish, and he acts as the voice of conscience for the protagonist, Helen. He's the one who helps awaken her to the political realities.
And what about in A Sport of Nature? There's a character named Hillel.
Yes, Hillel, a very significant name. Her name directly represents the Jewish moral tradition. Think of the great rabbinical sage Hillel. Yet the character is described in the novel as the Jew that went away. She abandons her tribe, her specific identity, to join the broader African liberation struggle.
So for Gordimer, it seems like the particularism of Jewish identity had to be shed for the universalism of the human struggle.
That seems to be the message. There's also a fascinating note in the sources about her father. Remember we said he wasn't sympathetic to black South Africans, despite being a refugee himself?
Yes, the great contradiction.
Well, in one of her short stories, My Father Leaves Home, she directly connects European anti-Semitism to South African racism. She writes about how her father's experience as a refugee should have made him more sensitive to the suffering of black people, but instead, it perhaps made him more fearful, more insular. She was dissecting her own father's moral failure on the page.
But she refused to claim victimhood for herself, though.
That's the absolute key to her mindset. She got very annoyed when people suggested her activism came from her being Jewish, from a history of oppression. She famously said, "I refuse to accept that one must oneself have been exposed to prejudice to be opposed to it."
That is a powerful and very demanding moral stance. She believed you fight evil because you're a decent human being, not because you're a member of a specific tribe that has also suffered.
Precisely. For her, it was about universal morality over tribal loyalty. She didn't want her anti-apartheid stance to be seen as just Jews helping the oppressed. She wanted it to be seen as humans helping humans.
So we've covered the writer, the activist, the witness. What about the woman at home? We know about the weak-heart childhood, but what about her adult life, her relationships?
Well, she was married twice. Her first marriage was to a local dentist named Gerald Gavron. That was very brief and ended in divorce after only a few years.
But then, in 1954, she married Reinhold Kesserer.
And this was the big one. This was the defining relationship of her life.
Who was he?
Reinhold was another refugee, but from a very different world than her father. He was a refugee from Nazi Germany, a member of the famous Kasserer family in Berlin, who were major art dealers and publishers. He was highly cultured, sophisticated. He actually established the South African branch of Sotheby's.
So he brought a world of European high culture to her.
He did. Gordimer described it as a wonderful marriage. It was a true partnership of equals that lasted until his death in 2001. It seems he provided the stable, supportive home life she needed to do her dangerous political work and her demanding creative work.
It sounds like he provided the stability she needed to do her dangerous work. He brought a European cosmopolitanism into her life that balanced the gritty South African reality.
Absolutely. A true partnership. But her personal life wasn't without drama. We have to talk about the unauthorized biography.
Ah, yes, the Ronald Suresh Roberts affair. This is a literary scandal that really shows her fiercely protective, maybe even controlling side.
It does. Gordimer authorized Roberts to write her biography. She gave him hundreds of hours of interviews, gave him exclusive access to her papers and letters. It was supposed to be the definitive, official account of her life.
So she authorizes him, gives him access, and then
she reads the manuscript and hates it. Absolutely hates it. She completely disowned the book, which was called No Cold Kitchen. She even tried to block him from quoting her letters. It got very messy in public.
Why? What was in it that she objected to so strongly?
She felt he had breached her trust on a number of very personal points. He wrote in detail about her husband Reinhold's final illness and death, which she felt was an invasion of privacy. He wrote about an affair she allegedly had in the 1950s, and he delved into her evolving and sometimes critical views on the Israel-Palestine conflict.
It's the classic battle, isn't it? A public figure wanting to control their narrative and the biographer wanting to expose the unvarnished truth.
And for a woman who spent her entire life exposing the uncomfortable truths about her society, she was fiercely, fiercely protective of the truth about herself. She wanted to be the observer, not the one being observed under a microscope.
She lived in the same house in Parktown, Johannesburg for over 50 years, that famous Herbert Baker-designed house. But the harsh reality of the new South Africa eventually came right through her front door.
The 2006 attack. It's a shocking story. She was 82 years old, at home. 3 men broke in. They robbed her of cash in her car. They locked her in a dressing room.
This is just heartbreaking. The woman who fought for the rights of the disenfranchised her whole life. And then she becomes a victim of the violent crime that plagued the new nation. Many of her white friends had already emigrated because of the crime rates.
They had. They'd moved to safer countries like Australia or the UK, or at the very least they'd moved into gated communities, these fortresses with high walls and electric fences. But Gordimer refused.
She wouldn't move even after being attacked.
She refused to move to a gated complex, and she absolutely refused to leave South Africa. She gave an interview where she said, "It's always been a nightmare in my mind to be cut off."
That goes right back to her childhood, doesn't it? The weak heart, isolation. Her mother put her in a box.
Exactly. She spent her whole adult life trying to break out of isolation, to connect across barriers. She wasn't going to let fear put her back in a box at the end of her life. Even when the reality was harsh and dangerous, she wanted to be in it. She accepted the risk of living in the real South Africa rather than the safety of a self-imposed prison.
And she didn't stop critiquing the government either. Her loyalty to the ANC didn't mean she went silent once they took power.
Not at all. She was very publicly critical of the Protection of State Information Bill, which critics called the Secrecy Bill. She saw it as a dangerous return to the censorship and state control of information that she had fought against her whole life.
And the HIV/AIDS crisis.
She was absolutely fierce on this. She directly criticized President Thabo Mbeki for his denialist stance on AIDS. You remember that tragic era when the government was questioning whether HIV even caused AIDS?
It was a catastrophe. It cost hundreds of thousands of lives.
Gordimer organized writers from around the world to contribute to Telling Tales, a fundraising book for AIDS treatment. She said she approved of everything Mbeki did except his stance on AIDS. But that one exception was a matter of life and death for millions. She proved that loyalty to the cause did not mean silence in the face of failure.
She really was a thorn in the side of anyone in power, wasn't she? Whether it was the apartheid government or the liberation heroes who had become the new establishment.
That is the true role of the intellectual, isn't it? To speak truth to power, regardless of who holds the power.
So she passed away in 2014 at the age of 90. A long life. A full life.
A monumental life.
When you look back at it all, from the little girl with the weak heart peering out the window in Springs to the Nobel Prize winner being celebrated on the world stage, what is the central takeaway?
I think the takeaway is right there in that concept of the weak heart. She was told she was too weak, too fragile to participate in the world. So she developed a different kind of strength, a strength of observation, a moral clarity, a laser focus on the ambiguities of life.
She didn't just see black and white, good and evil. She saw the gray. She saw the terrible choices that people are forced to make.
She documented the psychology of racism, not just the laws and the protests, but what those laws did to the human soul, both the oppressor and the oppressed. She looked at the corrosion within.
15 honorary degrees, the Nobel Prize. A legacy that is complicated, sure, but absolutely undeniable.
She was a witness who refused ever to look away.
You know, Gordimer once said something in an interview that really stuck with me. The interviewer suggested her books made people uncomfortable, and she said she resented that because they should be uncomfortable.
Yes, she believed that comfort was a state of ignorance. If you're comfortable, you're not paying attention.
And that's the provocative thought I want to leave our listeners with today. We live in a world of algorithms that are designed to feed us what we already like. We live in social media bubbles of confirmation bias. Gordimer's entire body of work was designed to pop the bubble.
It raises the question. In a world of increasing polarization and self-sorting, do we need more literature, more art that actively makes us uncomfortable?
Is comfort the enemy of truth? I think Nadine Gordimer would say yes, absolutely.
I think she would. If you are comfortable, you probably aren't paying close enough attention.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.